Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of GBC Live here on YouTube. I think we've actually set a GBC Live record that we've done it, I think, 8 weeks in a row. Off to a great start. But we will be not doing it next Tuesday. Vic, I, and Bad Language and other people will be shooting a video. Can't quite say where, can't quite say what, if you could read into that. But something is happening next Tuesday. Although there has been calls for us to go ahead, and there's a special topic we may cover. So look for us to get on that on Wednesday. Tonight we have Michael Patrick Hurley on. One of the biggest head turners here in LA in terms of, obviously, if you've ever seen his work, and we have a link below to MPH Paint, his Instagram account. You can just go through that and really be wowed. It's basically a Wizard of Oz moment, going through the colors and looking at these bike frames, and brings a lot of joy. So we will be talking to him about his process and some of his works, and let's bring him and Vic in. Good evening, Michael.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. Hey.
So thanks for coming on.
Absolutely.
I'm wondering, first, does it feel strange, like feeling natural air instead of having all that equipment on and being able to breathe freely?
Definitely, yeah. I use actually a remote air respirator, so I actually don't filter the air in my booth. I breathe in air from outside of the booth. So it's a more safer over time. You don't have to worry about filters getting old, and another thing that's really nice is that because it's a positive air pressure, I don't have to wear the mask as tight on my face. These are there's basically like cold air coming in from outside my booth. That's from outside my shop. So
high tech.
Wow.
Yeah. It's I do have the normal respirator pucks everybody has as well, and sometimes it's easier just to throw those on, but for the vast majority of my work, I breathe air from outside of the garage.
Oh wow! I would have chosen a much worse solution. That would really work for me.
Well, it's also really nice too because it gets really hot in there, so it's actually really nice to get that cold air in my face because it actually keeps my body temperature down as well. So.
Mm-hmm. So, bike painting, bike design,
Mm-hmm.
It's not as easy as spray painting a subway in New York City.
No.
How did you get into this? Were you a cyclist first, or was this something? Do you have an art background, or?
I do, yeah. So I grew up drawing and painting, and was always kind of doing art, if you will. Like I was really lucky. I went to a high school that had an art major discipline, so I basically could take art every day for an hour. So it was like something I could focus on. So I went from high school as an art major into a college for art. I went to the Rhode Island School of Design for graphic design. Where I kind of was really looking to expand my skill set beyond just drawing and painting, but learning at the time, new tools, typography, other types of disciplines within the kind of the graphic arts to supplement my kind of illustration background. So I went to school for art. I've always been doing things, always been kind of having projects, always working on something creative, something visual. And then when I graduated, I actually got into the interactive space. I spent the last majority of my career doing user interface design and user experience design for web apps and native apps, all types of interactions for the digital space, and got into cycling. So I basically spent the first 30 years of my life on a skateboard, and then when I met my wife Kate, she had played basketball, and we just needed something to do together. So we basically just our first date was a bike ride, and so we were in Providence, Rhode Island. And we went on this bay bike path. It was like a 30-mile ride, and it destroyed me. Like I'd never ridden a bike before, didn't have chamois or any kind of proper bibs or anything. And I just got home. I couldn't walk for like 4 days. It was awful. But I kind of got the bug. I was like, oh, this is pretty cool, and it was something really fun that we could do together. And she's pretty competitive, and I'm not necessarily competitive, but I like to push myself. And so, at any rate, we ended up getting kind of into the fixed gear scene in Providence, and I got immediately into like old vintage French bicycles of all things. And there was this guy, Sheldon Brown. I don't know if you guys know about him.
Of course.
Yeah, out of Westtown, Mass. And so I was in Providence, so I went up there to meet Sheldon, and he kind of just planted that seed, man. And I just got really, really into it, and I ended up restoring an old Chaton 1950s track frame. I had a couple Motobacons that I restored. And during that process, I ended up painting those bikes. Nowhere near, to the level that I do now, but it was my first time, kind of doing a full breakdown of an old vintage frame, restoring it all the way up, getting all the old period correct parts and doing all that kind of stuff. And so did that for about, 3 or 4 years. And then Kate and I moved from Providence back to Philadelphia area where I'm from. And all of a sudden we realized really quickly that we needed gears and we needed brakes and we needed a whole bunch of things because of the hills of where around Philadelphia are quite steep and punchy. And so, I was like, I could hop and skid and do my thing on a fixed gear, but I was just like, I'm just going to blow my knees out eventually or get hit by a car. So we ended up getting some vintage Colnagos and, down tube shifters, friction shifters and all that. And we rode those around for a while and, built better base mileage, got fitter and fitter. And then we went to the Truck Store Town Velodrome for a Friday night race. We had no idea. I'd never seen a velodrome, never been to a race like that before. But Kate's always on the lookout for stuff to do. And so she was like, hey, let's go. It was like, from Philadelphia, it's about an hour and a half north. So we were like, it's a Friday night. And so she's like, let's go up there and check it out. And then we went up there and was like blown away. In the middle of the, cornfields was like this velodrome and like international athletes from, New Zealand and Australia and Germany and like all these, like, it was just crazy. I was like, wow, like in the middle of nowhere. I mean, literally Mennonite buggies everywhere. And then there's this velodrome.
Wow.
So we went up there and then all of a sudden, they had this program called Air Products, and they were like, hey, learn how to ride the track and do these, it's basically like a class you could sign up for. And so we signed up for this. Oh man, it was like 5 a.m. class, and so we drove up from Philly, I think twice a week. It was like we were getting up at like 3:30 in the morning to do this, and but yeah, we got up there and we really loved it. And we found out that Kate was just like naturally gifted. I mean, she's just got a crazy engine and amazingly high VO2 and hemocrit and all the things you want as a cyclist. We had no idea. I mean, she had played basketball her entire life. And so she had never really, she knew she was always strong in the fourth quarter of basketball, but she didn't really put those pieces together. And then all of a sudden she was like, holy shit, like I'm a really good cyclist. And so anyway, so we ended up moving up to the velodrome, to the Lehigh Valley so that she could basically race and train full time. And that's kind of how we got kicked off really into the scene and really, into the cycling world. And then I met Tom Kellogg of Spectrum Bicycles. I don't know if you guys know Tom Kellogg, but he is, arguably one of the best painters in bicycle, of all time, really. Him, Joe Bell, that era of bike painters are just, who I look up to.
Oh, I heard of Joe Bell. I never heard of the first one you said.
Yeah, Tom Kellogg.
Tom Kellogg. Okay, I gotta look him up.
Look him up. Spectrum Bicycles.
Yeah.
So just the culture there is super super deep and has very deep roots and stuff. And so we just really full in as in cycling. And then we spent the better part of almost 7 or 8 years in the Lehigh Valley. And so through that time, just got really deep into I loved all the things around cycling in terms of design. So I got really into designing kits and, at that point I wasn't really painting bikes, but I was, fully immersed in cycling design culture and, just very interested in just doing that kind of work. And anyway, so when we ended up, leaving the Lehigh Valley, we decided we were going to move to the West Coast. And when we moved out to LA, I kind of I don't know, it's just through osmosis, I was just kind of I think, maybe Kate, I think there was she wanted to get a bike she got hired at Zwift and she was like, they're going to give me a credit to get a bike. And so she's like, well, I don't like any of the bikes that I can afford in the price range. So anyway, long story short, that we ended up I was like, I'll just paint it for you. You know what I mean? And so she got this bike and I ended up painting it. And then I kind of was like, oh, I could really, this is really fun. It kind of combines all the things I'm interested in, like design and form and, this tactile. I've been in the interactive space for so long, moving pixels around. And while it's very, it's a different skill set, it's just not very permanent. Most of the work that I've done in my 30-year career, I couldn't show you anymore because they go up, they go down, it's a very fluid medium, if you will. And so I was really drawn to the permanence and the tactical nature of a bicycle. It's form and function, and it's something that you use and you can appreciate in a very real way. And I like the permanence of it. And it also kind of brought me back to my hand skills, growing up drawing and painting. I was like, I had skills that arguably were more rare. When you get into the digital space, it's more about how you think about things and how you build, meaning and composition and use typography and image. But it's less dependent on actually having hand skills, like you're using this computer to manipulate these things. So it's really more about not that it's necessarily easier, but it's different, and so it kind of emphasizes different skills that aren't necessarily as directed towards like, how steady is your hand, or, how good is your eye-hand coordination and things like that. So I was really drawn back to the idea of like, oh, wow, like, this is something that really pushes the limits of my abilities. And there's just something really amazing about, some of the highest highs and the lowest lows, in terms of working with paint, because one mistake can cost you 20, 30, 40 hours, and so it's a totally different world, right? Whereas in the digital space, I can make a million mistakes a day, and it's no big deal, just copy, paste, edit, delete, like undo.
Your thing is more nerve-wracking, like you said, and you make one mistake and all that work's just toast.
Oh, I'm telling you, man. Yeah, Kate will attest to this. Some days when I wake up, I just know I have a big day, and it's, there's never a day that you can just send it. Every second matters. Most of the paint jobs I do are 100+ hours, and so I like to say every single second of that 100 hours is an opportunity to mess up. And every mistake is real. It's not a mistake that you can fudge, and it's like you really have to like be very conscious every single second of what you're doing. Or else, it's just going to cost you money, because when I make a mistake, I'm not getting paid for those 20, 30 hours to get back to where I was 2 minutes ago, so it's tough. You learn a lot of lessons. You put your time in, what they say, like, what is it? 10,000 hours to become a master of something.
Right. That's the way of the samurai.
Yeah. Right. So, you definitely, it's humbling, every day is, it's a constant learning process. I can work with the same materials and still learn something entirely new every time I'm painting a bike, or working with a different technique. A lot of the paint jobs I do, I'm always trying to push myself from something I've done before. So even though I'm still utilizing a lot of the same materials or the same process, I'm trying to do something that I haven't done yet, or, combination of things that I haven't combined, or, trying to create an effect that no one's seen, or just, unique. Nothing that I do or I try and do is like, I rarely paint like white bikes or black bikes or, single color bikes. Most of the work I do is highly bespoke, highly unique. I'm doing a lot of testers. Some of the paint jobs I do, I might do 8 or 9 different variations of it just to get to the right version that's going to be the best, so.
Do you have a favorite material that you like to work with, say carbon versus titanium, or what's your favorite material?
So for different reasons, like titanium is really nice because I typically get it ready to paint. So that's awesome. I don't have to sand it. I don't have to do anything to it.
I just happen to have a new Thai bike here with no paint on it.
Woo, yeah, perfect. So Thai's great for that. I love Thai because it's such a beautiful material, and it really is, arguably one of the best, materials to make a bicycle from, and it just the resilience of it. It's a special material. So I do like Thai a lot. I've done a lot of moots in my past that they're always fun to work on. Moots is great to work with. I would say though, in general, I like the shapes of most carbon bikes because the shapes are just so unique. So a lot of the design work I do, I'm really looking at the form of the bike as well as whatever the customer's, kind of subject matter or, interests are. I'm always looking at the form of the bike and the lines of the bike to really inform the design. I always do 3/4 renderings, front and rear of the bicycle because a lot of my designs really do wrap around and there's a lot of detail in areas that like just a side view or a front view wouldn't show you. So I always try and make sure that I'm really exploring the limits or just all the possibilities of a frame set, and so, carbon bikes just because of, what's happening with them, the integration, like I love doing the entire bike. Like to me, I really look for projects now that are, full bikes. Like I want every single component of the bike that you have, and I want to think about that and integrate that into the full design. So and it's just carbon's it's a very unique material. There's a lot you can do with it. There's things about raw carbon and integrating that into the design. There's just a lot of possibilities there. It's a very cool material. So if I had to choose, I'd probably say carbon. But at the same time, you know, a lot of times I'm getting these bikes. I mean, some of these bikes I get, you know, it'll take me almost 30, 40 hours to sand down the finish down to the carbon. Some brands are more difficult than others. Yeah, so there's a lot of effort before I'm even doing any amount of real paint work or you know, spraying anything. So
I have one quick question about that.
sure.
You know, Danger Home, I'm sure.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So when he takes the knife and starts scraping the paint, doesn't that make you cringe or like? It makes me cringe.
Yeah, no, actually, it's funny. I mean, different. So, you know, as you can imagine, every paint facility, you know, is applying different types of clear coats and different types of paints. So a knife actually can be a very effective way of getting the paint off and actually not damaging the carbon. The knife itself is not going to damage the surface of the fabric of the carbon, whereas, you know, you can easily sand too deep into carbon and really hurt it.
Okay. I thought he was taking a big risk.
No. Well, I mean, there's always risks involved, obviously, with carbon. I mean, there's some bikes that I've painted, like you know, I think arguably one of the scariest one for me to sand was a Cannondale Super 6 Evo. It was the seat tube on that bike, just in its production form. I mean, you can press into it and it'll move. Like it's super thin. So,
yeah,
you know, there's certain bike frames out there that, you know, when I get them, I'm like, okay, you know, like it's maybe not as important to get all the way back down to the raw carbon. I'll just go to like primer or you know, primer carbon and just keep a little bit there just to give myself a little buffer, because, you know, the last thing I want to do is ruin the integrity of the frame itself.
Right.
So I'm like very, very sensitive to that process. I mean, a lot of people have always said to me, you know, like, well, because I'm a one-man shop, you know, and so everything gets done by me and by my hands alone. And the reason why I do that is because of the nature of these materials. There is no, call it like, unskilled version of this stuff. You know, it's like even sanding down the original finish of the bike is arguably one of the most important steps, and one of the most integral to the safety of the bicycle. So, you know, and I also have relationships with bike brands that you know, if I'm painting that bike, that they will respect the warranty. So it's really, it's very important that a skilled hand is doing that work. And, you know, it's you know, it's a very vital step. So yeah, so carbon can be tricky, like I said, but it's really nice because a lot of these manufacturers now are offering a ready to paint version from the factory, and that's obviously the most ideal. Again, now we're back to, you know, very minimal amount of prep. There's always a little bit you have to do, but it's a lot less, and obviously it you know, totally makes all of the safety issues go away, and usually the warranties from the manufacturer, they're a lot less finicky because, you know, you're not sanding anything really down.
Right.
So yeah.
Well, my nerdy design question.
Sure.
I actually went to grad school for design and computation.
Oh, cool.
Didn't graduate, but but I went there. But you know, my dad was actually an art major, and I look at his artwork, and I don't think it would translate well to bikes, because like I'm, you know, everything, like, you know, in terms of detail, you know, that's kind of hard to do at that scale, but you know, also, you know, you want some type of vibrancy to match the paint and everything else. Was that two parts of the questions? One was doing bike painting like a big adjustment to your aesthetic, and two, do you have people come to you with maybe my dad's design idea? Maybe it doesn't quite fit the scope of,
that's a good question,
you know, what you could put onto a bike.
Yes. So that's a good question. So in general, I really try and only take projects where I like to tell my clients I'm a designer first and a painter second. And so I to be honest with you, like, it's not that I can't translate somebody else's design. I have done it. I have worked on certain things that, you know, I might get a sketch to say, hey, I'm looking for something like this, and then I interpret that sketch. A lot of the stuff, you know, even if you give me a fairly detailed rendering, to the first part of your question, there's a lot I have to do to translate that to three-dimensional tubing, especially in a carbon world where that tubing is not round usually, and it's not uniform. So actually, one of the nice things about Thai, again, is that you can go back to, like, for the most part, some of the tubing can be double butted and a little bit flayed out towards the ends, but in general, they tend to just be round tubes. And it's a lot easier to do wraparound designs on a round tube than it is on a, you know, like a Pinarello, for a good example. You know, like the Pinarello has so many edges and so many soft round corners, and then that goes into a hard edge. And, you know, all of those things you have to account for when you're creating designs that wrap around those tubings. And you'll notice there are painters out there, and there's certain, you know, based on budget as well. Like if you're looking to, I wouldn't call cut corners, but be more efficient, you'll notice that some designs don't wrap around. They might have another graphic element come through, like a color block or something, so that the design itself doesn't have to be seamless. And that's, again, it's just, these are all design choices you make to get the design into the budget of the client, and then also to make sure that you're happy with the end result and it looks the way you want it to look. I love the challenge of the three-dimensionality of the bike, though. Like to me, getting designs to render well against these tubes and to look really good on a bike, when somebody's riding it too. I don't think about these bikes as precious things you hang on your wall. These are bikes to be built, or bikes to be ridden. So I'm constantly thinking about how does it look like once it's like with wheels, and once it's built up, and if a rider's on it, and what's it going to look like at speed. And you're always kind of making bikes hopefully look fast when they're standing still. That's the end goal, is that they're these exotic, beautiful machines, and you just want to emphasize the lines that the industrial designer created when designing the frame. And then you just want to, obviously bring your design aesthetic in terms of color and shape and, I just, to me, it's like, I love the canvas. It's such a challenge. It's and it's at the right scale. It's like, I've painted cars before, but it's such a big scale, and it's, I like the intimacy of a bicycle. It's there's something about it that just like and I like the idea of integrating the bike with kit. I like, most of my bikes that I have that I painted for my wife and myself, like we have matching kits for everything and matching helmets and matching, so to me, it's like I like to think of the design as a whole. It's not a single piece. It's really, it's a sum of many pieces.
See, Zach, matchy. He teases me because I'm very matchy.
Yeah, I've been teased myself, so I can relate.
So when a customer comes to you and wants something, do they just give you like color ideas and then you present several designs, or how does that process work?
So I mean, as you can imagine, certain clients come to me and they're like, "Hey man, do you for instance, like, some of my clients come to me and they're like, listen, man, I love your stuff. Like, I'm going to give you this bike. Like, I like these types of colors, but otherwise surprise me.
Surprise me.
Yeah. Like I want to, I don't know if you guys were familiar with Speedwagon, but
yep.
like,
Bill has one too.
Okay, cool.
He's got to surprise me.
I was going to bring him up.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's their number one paint job, is to surprise me. So there's a whole, I would argue, like, once you build a reputation and you have a portfolio that people can reference, it's like going to a tattoo artist where it's like, this is what I do, and it's like, you just trust you trust me, you trust the process. I might ask you for a couple things like, mild to wild. I might ask you like, give me some colors, ranges that, that you want to see. There might be a question around like, do you like geometry or do you like organic, just in terms of some of the design elements, how do you want it to feel overall? Do you want it to, those types of things. Like it can be very like, think of it like a creative brief to any kind of design project. It can be very much like, I can maybe ask you 3 or 4 questions and you don't even want to see anything until I deliver it to you. And then I've got other clients where I'll build up, basically I usually use Pinterest. And what I do is I basically build a mood board with them. And so I'll create a board. I'll invite, the client to the board, and then we just start pinning and we just start throwing images in there, anything. It could, watches, cars, fabrics, you name it. It could be anything. And then we'll set up a call and we'll discuss the board together. And so I get an idea of like, I also ask them a lot of times, like, put in stuff you hate, like put in things you don't want to see at all. Like sometimes it's actually more informative to see what you don't like versus what you do, So, I'm a big fan of like, hey man, throw everything at the wall and then we can have a couple conversations. We can talk about that board. And then what I usually do is I'll refine the board and then we'll have a follow-up to say, okay, how does this board feel? Like, is this the right tone? It's almost like, again, just it's representational of what the final object could be. And then from there, again, depending on the client, depending on the circumstance, I usually do what I was saying earlier is like basically a 3/4 front rendering and a 3/4 rear rendering of the bike and all the components that might be supplied with the bike as well. And then I'll go ahead and I draw these, I basically create these, Illustrator files that are these renderings. And then I basically draw in everything, all the colors, all the detail, all the graphics. And then I basically, again, depending on the client, depending on the circumstance, I might do 2 or 3 different versions of that, of that design, or maybe subtle differences in the design or colorways or whatever. And then, have a review with the client. And then usually it's 1, maybe 2 rounds. And then we get to something that we really like. And then once we have something we really like, I put together what I call a project proposal, where I basically break down every single step. I mean, in the most minute detail. And, I don't know how many of these clients actually look through all that stuff, but for me, I need to do that because I can't tell you what it's going to cost until I do that. Like, I don't know, you know what I mean? So I actually use that process for myself, not only to put together my kind of paint schedule, but also just so I know, not only every step, but how long it's going to take me. And I've, when I first started doing this, I was, I'd be lucky if I was like 50% accurate. You know what I mean? I was always went over my time. But as you get more familiar with materials and you do this longer and longer, my estimates now are, I would argue 10% up or down usually from where I think it's going to be. And it's only if I make one of these mistakes we talked about earlier that I get really blown up, so if I don't make mistakes, it usually goes as I think it's going to go, and they're fairly accurate, and the nice thing too is that, with the client, I always eat, like if I blow up an estimate, I eat that cost. I'm not going to put that on the client. I don't want them to be surprised with, a huge amount more than I said it was going to be. So, it's always one of those things where I want to respect my estimate and I stand behind them. But like I said, to me, it's a very transparent process. I really want to bring the clients into that process. I want to show them every step. I think most clients are really, the ones that kind of geek out on it. They're like, holy shit, like I had no idea, like you did all these steps and it took all this time. And so if anything, it just builds empathy, right? It's just like, okay, I get it now. Like I totally understand what you're doing here. And when you look at the bottom of that project proposal, it says 130 hours, and you're like, okay, all right, I'm not going to see my bike for a month, and it's like, yeah, it's going to take me that long to do it all,
When you were doing bills, he was telling me about it, and he told me he went down there and he couldn't believe how many steps, and he was just like, he went on, and I'm like, okay, dude.
Yeah, no, his bike was really challenging.
Excited.
Yeah, his bike was really hard. Yeah, the chrome finish, to get it to that level of mirror chrome it's just really, really, really hard. You can't hide from anything. Everything is exposed. The entire process. There's actually, you end up painting the bike almost 3 times over, because the first step in that process is basically you're painting the bike black, and then you clear coat it, and then I basically cut the clear coat compound and polish it to a mirror finish where there's 0 imperfections in the paint. So it's literally a black bike finished, and then I spray the chrome. And there's also with those materials, once I'm done the clear coat and I compound and polish it, I have to let the bike sit in my oven for almost 7 days. And the reason why you do that is you want the clear coat to get as hard as possible, because the harder the clear coat is, the more mirror effect you'll get once you spray the mirror paint, because the mirror paint, essentially, it's a bunch of silver particles that are suspended in the paint, and so those silver particles, they lay flat and it becomes a mirror surface. The harder the underlying surface is, the more reflective nature you're going to get out of that chrome. Every single step from the time that you start painting there, you have an opportunity to dull that finish. And so with Bill's bike in particular, I probably did, I don't know, maybe six test panels before I got to a process that produced the best mirror finish that I could possibly get. And so, and again, for me, especially with a bike like that and knowing what he was looking for, it was like, I have a certain standard, and it's like what I own this and what I ride it. And and to me, that's always what I use when I'm doing paint, is like, if it doesn't meet my standard, I do it again. I even had Bill come down to look at it, because there was a little thing that I wasn't 100% behind. I was like, I don't know, man, I got these little bit of silver fleck, and it ended up not even showing up in the final product. But like, for me, it was worth having him, because like, he was local, so it was easy for him to come see it. But it was really important for him to look at it and say, yeah, we're good to go, keep going, because otherwise I would have stripped it and I would have done it again, so it's one of those things where when you're dealing with bikes of these caliber, you're looking at it, a very, very high-end bicycle. Everything matters, and for me, I there's not a corner that I would even remotely consider cutting. So I just always, would defer back to, like, again, the test on me. And I'm certainly my most harsh critic. I think my wife would attest to that as well. So it was one of those things where once you spray the chrome, then you have to let it sit another at least 5 to 7 days for that chrome to fully settle. Again, it dries and almost immediately, but you want those particles to lay flat, and they'll lay flat and lay flat. And then when you spray the clear over the chrome to get, because again, before you even touch the candies, I've got to basically shoot clear over top of the chrome again. the clear process on that, if you just spray clear like a normal medium wet coat on top of that chrome, it's going to dull immediately. You're going to lose all the mirror effect. So what you have to do is you adjust the gun so that you're shooting like 99% air and just 1% clear coat. So it's like a mist. And then you hold the gun like 1.5 feet away from the frame, and you mist it. And you do basically like 4 mist coats. And then after you do the 4 mist coats, you let it sit for like 20 minutes, and then you do your medium wet coats and you do your full like clear coating. So even in that process, and I experimented with that as well to get to the best possible layout so that I just was fully confident, on the bike when I was doing it. But I don't know, I probably put, I don't even know how many hours before I even touched his bike, just some testers just to figure it out. This is the first chrome bike that I did with this technique. And it's by far, I mean, honestly, it even blew me away how mirrored it is. It's crazy. Like, so,
wow.
yeah. So, but anyway, it was a process. It was certainly difficult. And then once you start shooting the candies, as you can see, like it's a 2-color candy job. So I had to mask, in this case, I did the blue first and the orange second. But like after I did the blue, which, arguably is enough masking all the sharp points and all that good stuff. But when I removed that mask and then I went to mask for the orange, I had to make sure that my masking lines like matched perfectly, because if they didn't match enough, I would have chrome showing through. And if I masked too much, it would be dark as hell because it would be the orange over top of the blue. So the masking of, dude, I can't even tell you how intense every step of that bike was. Every step.
Wow.
Like, so,
wow.
I'll tell you, he loves it. Sorry, Zach. He loves it, and everybody that sees it just goes, wow! Like it never stops.
Cool.
I was gonna say, it's like all 3 of us have actually seen it in person.
Yes.
And this being on the screen here probably doesn't do it any close to justice, because like when you see this in real life, your eyes are just not used to seeing colors and light hit a material like this. And then, just the shape of the bicycle itself, just, elegantly like changing the shades and reflections. It's just definitely like, I would have problems riding it. I would just want to look at it the whole time. I'd be too afraid.
You should have a picture of the handlebar, because he did the logo, this logo on the top of the bar in the chrome, and it's just the sickest. Every time I see it, I was like, I have to do this.
It's nice.
I just love it.
Thank you, man.
The blue looks like you can just put your hand in it, like water. It looks like you can just dip your hand.
I love
so
like,
sick.
the House of Color candies are just, they've been doing it forever, and there's nothing better than a House of Color candy, dude.
They're so
good.
Yes.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's funny too, because like, I don't know if you guys saw like the Trek, their tour bikes this year, but they had that new chrome kind of. They've been doing a lot of chrome.
They stole your.
No. It's all good, man. That's one of the cool things about bike paint too, right? Is that like the trends that you see things come through, and it's like all of a sudden people are like, I follow obviously a ton of painters, and it's just awesome, man. It's such a good community, and like we're all like just inspiring each other and motivating each other, and like I can't wait to try out new techniques. And this chrome has been around for a while, but like I said, up until now I hadn't really gotten to the level of finish. Like I knew that it was possible, and I was like, I just need to really push it. And Bill kind of just threw down the gauntlet and was like, here's my new dogma, let's do it. And I was like, all right, man, like, all right, let's go. So like
I saw that frame when it was brand new, and he told me he was going to get it painted, and it was beautiful. I'm like, are you sure? Like,
I know.
Are you crazy?
Well, tell me about sanding one of these things. You're sanding like a brand new dogma, and it's like, like you said, like it's beautiful out of the gate, and I'm like, oh
awesome.
Man, I gotta sand this thing.
Man. Yeah.
Now, I want to take a little step back, and we're going to throw on one of your Instagrams that shows you actually doing the process, and I know it's just going to be a little bit all over the place here, because I know it's kind of on a loop. Sure. Maybe some of the stuff got stolen off the movie The Martian. I don't know, but this is just your workspace, and I mean, you just look at this and it's just like, so much.
That's the spot.
Like how, I mean, can you briefly describe, because there's so much going on here, like all these different spaces and
so I work at I work at a 2-car garage. And so when I first started painting, I was in Venice, and we had 2 two single garages that we were in kind of like one of those complexes where you could rent garages, and it was like the best deal in LA because I could rent a garage for $100 a month, and I was like, oh my god, that's amazing. Now our rent was insane and bonkers, but like I could rent garages for 100. So I built all these things that you're seeing essentially with this very like modular construction type, and everything's on wheels and everything's modular so that it can basically fit, and I can break it down and move it to different garages because I'm still a renter. I'm not building into a house that I own, so everything has to be fairly mobile, and I'm always looking to maximize the space. And this is what you're seeing here is essentially the fourth iteration of my work facility. And so like this is just 4 years of learning, 4 years of optimizing, and then ultimately this is now in a new house that we've been living in Playa del Rey, where I have, instead of two single car garages, it's one double wide. So all this stuff is now in one space. And then this is like, inside of the house where I basically do all of my, masking and taping and all the clean stuff, that, you just requires that kind of stuff like plotting and cutting, stuff like that. So yeah, so I've got a 2-car garage where, all the, call it my sanding booth is, and then the paint booth is, and then inside is where I do all the computer work and all the kind of, vinyl masking and cutting and all that good stuff. So
it looks like a doctor's office.
Well, I'm kind of a neat freak, it's like,
wow.
Yeah, it's like one of those things where it's like, it's funny. I always say to people, it's like, the painting bikes is kind of, it really utilizes every single skill set that I have. And one of them is being very, very clean and very neat, and everything has a place. Everything needs to be clean. Like I'm one of those people who can't do anything unless my workstation is completely set up before I sit down. Like if all my tools are, like they're always where they should be, there's everything, you can see my paint guns in here. Everything's always where it should be. It's always, everything's clean. I just, for me, it's like there's enough variables of where I can mess up. I need to control every variable that I can control. So that way it's like, the only areas where like I might mess up is because I'm just like, doing something that, arguably there's always a subtle risk of things happening, and then this is the oven that I built basically just to, again, I don't really do force baking. What I usually do is I keep my oven at a constant temperature, even though we live in Southern California, as you guys know, it can dip at night and stuff. So when I start a paint job, the bike never is outside of, say, a 75 to 90 degree window of temperature. And so what that really allows me is, again, just complete consistency. My paints cure when they're supposed to. They, I don't have any problems with any kind of, solvent pops or, things that occur when the temperature starts to fluctuate on you. So for me, again, it's like I've made enough mistakes and I've had enough failures that weren't necessarily anything I did, but something that happened. Even this past winter was really difficult for me because we had a very cold, wet winter. And there was definitely some challenging moments where I just didn't have slow enough reducers or fast enough reducers because, again, Southern California, it's rarely I'm painting in below, say, 60 degree weather. But this winter, there was multiple days where I was shooting and it was probably mid 50s. And so I ended up bringing a lot more heaters into my spaces so I could make sure my temperatures were always at good temps and stuff like that. But yeah, long story short, though, the space has to be dialed or else, you're just going to run into other problems. But I probably go a little bit overboard with that stuff.
Zach, don't show me your garage.
Hey, you're looking at the clean stuff here. Yeah. Turn it around. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to bring up some of your work here. Sure. And is this one of your bikes?
Yeah, that's my cross bike or my gravel bike. It's kind of my homage. Like I said before, I think we were talking. I probably had 30 years of skateboarding, in my past. In fact, I did play some organized sports, but for the vast majority of my childhood, I just skateboarded. And so this bike was, obviously it's a Santa Cruz bicycle. So I kind of, this bike is kind of my homage to mid 90s skateboarding and kind of Jim Phillips and all the graphics and illustrations he did, like the screaming hand and all that kind of stuff. So the top tube, it's kind of hard to see in this rendering here, but the entire top tube is basically a bunch of Santa Cruz skate graphics, stickers. And the way I did the design was I kind of like overlapped them. So it literally looks like a bunch of stickers like overlapping each other. On the top tube, and then the head tube is Santa Cruz and Japanese lettering, which was they did like a tour, skate tour in Japan, and so they kind of altered the logo for that, and so I did that on the head tube. So for me, this was just kind of like a way for me to kind of combine my two loves, in terms of skateboarding and cycling, and then also play around with some fun colors.
Hold on. You drew the stickers on instead of just putting real stickers on and clear coating on?
Oh, no. All these graphics are paint. Like I don't use decals really ever.
Wow.
Yeah. Nothing. Everything's masked. Everything is, again, like one of the things, like, for me, that's it's just as much fun doing that design work than it is to paint it, right? Like, and it makes, when I'm doing the 100 hours of paint work, so much more gratifying because it's my designs. It's like that's why it's really difficult. Like I probably won't ever accept anything that's not something that I can design, just because it's so much labor and work to do the paint side of it, the production side, that it's like I need to be making something that I did, or else I don't know. You know what I mean? It's just too hard. It's just too it's too demanding. It's too stressful. Yeah.
Wow.
And
wow.
this one here,
I couldn't think of how to describe it, but that's the one I wanted to see.
Yeah, this one's nuts. Yeah, this
the Trek on the down tube is just like, I just stared at that for like 20 minutes. Like, how did you do that?
This is so many steps, man. This bike is, this one probably got, this one's north of 150 hours. This one was crazy. So what I did first was basically just paint the bike using a 3-color pearl gradient from top to bottom. So it's a little hard to tell in this video, but if you see it in like sunlight, the top of the bike is very light blue, and then it gets to a very deep marine blue. Oh. And then once I did the pearl, I basically I did all of these tentacles you see here are all hand masked. And so those I just used line tape and then basically made all the tentacles. And then I sprayed, well, actually, no, I take that back. I sprayed the Trek logo first because I needed the logo so that I could put the tentacles in and out of the logo. Because if you notice on the down tube, the tentacles go in and out of the Trek logo.
Yes.
So like I had to have the Trek logo there first, so then I could draw in, line out the tentacles. And then the tentacles themselves are this process called Marbleizer by House of Color. They create, so what you do is you spray black first. And then this Marbleizer is basically like a silver, and it's kind of like an opaque. It's a little thicker. It's almost kind of like, it's hard to describe, but it's thicker than normal paint. And you spray the silver over top, and then you use Saran wrap, and you basically blot the Saran wrap on the silver, and it pulls the silver, and it basically gives it kind of like, as you would imagine, like the texture of like what an octopus would look like. It has kind of like this like very like it's like, and they call it marble, but it's not really marble. It feels more like, almost like a stone-like texture, or like all the little suction cups to the skin of the octopus. And then once I did that, then I shot red candy over that to give it the red color. And then I masked and did subtle airbrushing, so you can see some of the tentacles go behind one another. And so I had to do all the masking and then do the subtle airbrushing to give the tentacle a little bit of definition, and then did the shadowing. And then once I did that, I then did what they call alcohol inks over the entire bike. And so what that is basically like, you think about like watercolors, but it's like it's solvent-based watercolor basically. And what you're doing is you're using literally, like I brush on alcohol, and then I throw on the pigment, and then I use one of those little like photo bulb, like those things I used to clean film with photography. It's like a little bulb with like a little needle, and you squeeze it and it blows air. Yeah. Anyway, so you use that to basically move the alcohol ink around on the surface, and that creates that kind of like liquid texture. And so yeah, this bike is like insane, dude. This bike is so many layers. And so that Trek logo was yellow before I put the alcohol ink over top of it, and then it makes it kind of green because the blue alcohol inks are over top of the yellow. And same thing with the Trek head badge. It's actually yellow, and then the alcohol inks over top. So yeah, this bike, honestly, like it was so hard to photograph this one. Like you need to see this one in person.
I'd love to see it.
Yeah,
So you just design this and do it, and the customer's like, yes, or did you go back and forth? Like, did he approve this design?
Yeah. So this one I actually did a full rendering. Like the client came and was like, I want to do this. And so like he wanted to do an octopus. Like he wanted, like, I kind of like, this is my interpretation of what he asked for. So you'd have to ask him like whether like what I did versus like what he thought he was asking. I don't know if there was a big delta between those things or what. I mean, he was very happy with the final product, but like this is definitely like me interpreting
that's
what
cool.
he asked for. Yeah.
It's
it's pretty nutty.
It's my new favorite.
Oh, thanks.
It's my new favorite.
Until the next one.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, it might be like literally the most amount of time I've ever spent on a bike, I think. just because the number of steps, it was just insane.
Yeah, I want to pull up this one here. This one is a little bit of a, it's a different because it kind of definitely with the marble, but then with the design and this photo doesn't show the detail as much, but this is also just.
I didn't see that one.
This one's insane. Yeah, this one. I think in my Instagram, if you go scroll to the bottom of my feed, there's a video of this one. It moves around it, but this one was actually a good friend of mine was hit by a car on PCH, and she was really, really, really hurt, and so a local bike shop, Giant Santa Monica, Elon, basically got this open donated this frame for a raffle. So this paint job was actually something that I did. It's a free paint job to support her recovery, and so we did this paint job, and this was because it was the client was just amazing. This guy was just incredible. He's out of the Bay Area, and he's got a custom leather business called Story. And he was like, he came to the table again with very much like he wanted this kind of rusted, patinaed aluminum, and he wanted marble. And I was like, okay. And I had never done a hydro dip before. And I realized there was no way I was going to be able to mask and create this with traditional masking techniques. And I'd been looking at all these hydro dip bikes, and I'm like, oh shit, well, I guess I got to try this, And so because this bike was, I wasn't getting paid for it, and the client was so cool, he's like, yo, man, if you want to figure out a new technique, let's do it. And so he was super patient, and I don't even know how many testers I did. I probably did 30 testers, because with marbling, there's a lot of ways to do it. There's a lot of materials you can do it with, and they all produce slightly different techniques, and they all are different to work with. They have very different, call it, processes around the window of opportunity. So a lot of these marbling paints, you might have 1 or 2 minutes to work with the material before it starts to set. And so they're very difficult to work with. And I had to figure out how I was going to dip an entire frame too. So even that was an experiment. Okay, what kind of container am I going to have to find so I can do this? And then how do I dip this bike? And, there's just a million things I had to figure out. And then obviously this is a double hydro dip. So the way I did with this is the initial part of this bike is the patina, metal, kind of the aquas and the browns and those types of colors. And then once you do this marble dipping, what's so much effort outside of just learning how to dip the bike is really burying, because it creates kind of the surface is not flat. So you have to shoot a bunch of clear, sand and block, shoot clear, sand and block, so that you can get a flat surface. And so you do the first hydro dip, you sand the bike, you shoot clear, you sand the bike, you shoot clear, you sand the bike. And then I masked those little rings, to create the gradient from the marble or the second hydro dip to the first. And then I did the second hydro dip. And then again, you do all the clear coating and sanding and all that good stuff. And then I used my airbrush and remasked it again, used my airbrush to shoot the black so that there was enough separation and contrast between the two different finishes. And then we did the gold leafing, and then this is 24 karat gold leaf. So that in itself is a whole nother technique and process you do, which we can go into if you want to hear more about that, but that's a whole nother thing. Yeah, so this bike was, it was really special to do it for the reasons why it was being created, but it was also really special in that I learned a whole lot around hydro dipping. And I don't even know how many bikes I've done now with hydro dipping, but it definitely proved to be worth learning, because I've done so much hydro dipping since. But yeah.
So not that it's important, but do you know how much weight a paint job like that adds to the frame?
It's actually not too bad, because even though I'm shooting a lot of clear and sanding, I'm doing that to get it flat. The end surface is certainly more than a normal paint job. I mean, if a normal paint job, a good normal paint job should be in the range of 100 to 150 grams. I would imagine, given the nature I did 2 hydro dips here, that this is probably in that 300 gram range. But for a gravel bike,
it's not important.
It's not that important. In fact, this bike's not even built. He just hung it on in his store in San Francisco. So this bike is actually in his shop, in his leather shop. In fact, there's a little logo on the rear. I don't know if it's on the behind. Yeah, the little Story logo or whatever. So that's his shop's logo. Yeah, Story. Yeah. So yeah, so this bike's, I mean, this is really just more of an art piece anyway. But I do discuss weight with my clients, especially when we do get into hydro dipping, just because it does add a little bit more than a standard paint job would. But you'd be amazed, like I said, like, you know, because of the way I'm doing this, I'm just trying to get it flat again. The depth ends up being not much more than, you know, a multi-stage paint job, but it's just the process of doing it. If I clear coat it and sand it flat immediately, you're going to lose a whole lot of the color because it's going to sand right into it. But at the end of the day, you know, what I'm hoping to do is, you know, again, through that process is more or less, I'm not really doing a ton of build because I'm sanding so much in between the clear coat. But it's just, you know, all of my finishes are glass. You know, you can't feel any of the graphics. You can't, you know, like
I've tried.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah.
I've rubbed and rubbed. I can't feel anything.
Yeah.
I can vouch for that.
There's a big difference, you know, again, between, you know, really high-end custom, you know, paint and, you know, I'm not knocking anybody in particular, but you know, this type of work, you know, again, I would argue the final finish for me is as important as the design. I want my final finishes to be like mirror glass.
Well, let's keep it real. You're not doing these on the cheap.
No, I'm not. No. I mean, yeah, it's like I said, 100 plus hours. I mean, that's 100 hours that I'm not spending with my wife and my dog and riding a bike. And, you know, so it's at the end of the day, you know, if you think about, you know, any type of high end, high skilled design and labor, you know, you get what you pay for, you know, so. That's, I don't know. I stand behind it.
One more quick question. So as a one-man show, like you must have a backlog. Like if I wanted to do my bike, do I have to wait 2 years for a paint job, or like where would I be in line?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm kind of reconfiguring that at this right now. I'm booked until the end of the year right now, but for next year, I have some plans in the works to kind of normalize my workload a little bit. I've been very fortunate. I've never needed to look for work, which has been really nice. I think once you get enough of a portfolio out there and enough of a reputation, the work finds you. I think now it's just a matter of me really honing in on what makes the most amount of sense for my life and what I want in terms of balance and how many bikes do I want to do a year. And I think it's really important. I haven't been in a lot of balance, honestly, in the past couple of years because I have been kind of doing paint. I have done it full time for, you know, a year and a half, but before that I was doing it as, you know, kind of a side hustle. And so as you can imagine, you know, with the amount of time I'm putting into these frames, you know, working 80-hour weeks, you know, plus was pretty normal for a very long time. And so I think I just need to, you know, kind of change it up a little bit and maybe, you know, do things that are a little bit more akin to exactly what I want to focus on and just make sure that I'm able to still, you know, ride my bike and be fit and be happy and spend time with my family. So, you know, I think if you talk to any painters, they'll probably give you a similar story. It's very easy to lose your life doing this type of work because it's just so labor intensive and it doesn't scale, you know, and I think that's one of the biggest lessons I also learned is that I'm never going to make money doing quantity ever. Like it's much better for me to look at this work as fine art. It's much better for me to work with people who really appreciate what this is so that I can do my best work and they can get arguably something they can't get anywhere else, you know, or arguably very few people could do what I do for that person. And I just would rather stay in those spaces because I think it's just more gratifying for me. And I think I'm able to provide a service, hopefully that, you know, people want. You know?
So you didn't answer the question though. 2 years, 3 years?
Again, like next year, I'm going to come out with a different model, I think, for next year. So hopefully, if somebody was interested, there would be an opportunity for them to get into my next year's queue. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, I think right now I'm thinking, you know, maybe I'm probably going to do more of like a, you know, not a fixed price maybe, but like something that's a little bit more like, hey, this is what I do. You know, I want your full bike, and this is the way it's going to go down. And I'm not really interested in, you know, 2 color paint jobs, 1 color, you know, whatever. This is what I do. And then, you know, kind of selling like basically like 10 slots and first come, first serve. And if you want to transfer that slot to somebody else, great. I don't really care at the end of the day. It's just, but each slot is what it is. And so that way I can manage the work better and I can do the kind of work I want to do. And it's a little bit more normalized from my perspective, because as you can imagine, even walking through my process we talked about earlier, it's very time consuming, just working with a client and going through these iterations and rendering those 3/4 fronts and 3/4 rear renderings are very detailed. Like I could show you them. They themselves take hours and hours to do. But they're important, you know, especially when the client is spending the kind of money they're spending. And it's very important for me just to make sure that what I see in my head is actually something that I can do on this 3-dimensional object.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm going to turn Michael off for a second by just, hey, Vic, we're just going to buy those slots and
I know.
we'll sell them. Okay. That's our business plan.
Anyway.
You know, we'll sell for double.
Yeah.
Well, I thought about even auctioning them too. I thought about
don't do that. No, don't do that. Then I'll get priced out.
That's it.
Please don't do that.
Well, Michael, this was awesome, and
yeah,
I'd love to have you back and go into more bikes, because this was gorgeous.
Awesome.
And
thank you.
just you can't half-ass this stuff. You really have to go all in on these bikes, and it's not just the design, but it's also the work behind it. So
thank you.
I even if you're not into cycling, you look at these things and they're amazing works of art. It is
absolutely art.
It is.
Thank you guys.
Yes.
Thank you.
And it's everlasting. So
thank
you so much for joining us. And everyone, look, we've got a link to his Instagram below to everything else. And just don't buy his slots, because Vic and I are going to buy them. Okay?
Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it. Thanks for the interest. And, just very happy to be here. Thank you.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Cool, guys. Cheers.